Four corners. Underwater treasures. Underwater treasure. Imagine exploring shipwrecks and sunken cities for lost treasures. Underwater archaeologists do this every day. They often find artifacts. Artifacts may be buried in the ocean bed, in dark, deep and dangerous waters. They need to be excavated with great care. Every shipwreck or lost city contains artifacts that can help us understand how people lived in the past. In this book you can discover 5 underwater sites and the secrets they hold. Artifacts from Port Royal that have been cleaned and restored. A diver uncovers part of a building in Port Royal, which is now underwater. It was once a thriving city in the Caribbean. Uncovering the Mary Rose. In 1545, King Henry VIII of England watched his navy sail off to fight invading French ships. The pride of his fleet of ships was the Mary Rose, a majestic warship lined with guns and cannons. The ship was heavily loaded with weapons and was unstable. Just over a kilometer offshore, a gust of wind tipped the ship heavily to one side. Water flooded through the babel doors and within 1 minute, the Mary Rose had sunk. More than 700 people drowned. This is the only picture of the Mary Rose. It was painted in 1546, a year after the ship sank. The Mary Rose project began with British diver Alexander McKee. Centuries later, in 1965, Alexander McKee began to search for the long-lost ship. McKee lived on the south coast of England near the place where the Mary Rose had sunk. He had learned about the Mary Rose as a boy and had made up his mind to find it. People thought he was crazy to think a wooden ship could have lasted underwater for so long. They gave him the nickname Mad Mac, but McKee was determined. A great adventure was about to begin. The Dean brothers. In the 1830s, the inventors of the first diving helmet, the Dean brothers, discovered the Mary Rose by accident. They were searching for lost fishing equipment when they stumbled across some guns and cannons. They realized they had found the wreck of the Mary Rose. Soon after, however, the Mary Rose and its location were forgotten. This diving helmet is similar to the one used by the Dean brothers. Wreck site. Different people had various ideas about exactly where the Mary Rose might have sunk. Alexander McKee checked many old maps and charts until he found a 19th-century marine chart that marked a site just off the south coast of England. A diver prepares to dive down to the site of the Mary Rose. McKee gathered a team of divers, who worked without payment. Some had heard about McKee's nickname. They laughed and called themselves Mad Max Marauders. They were keen to prove other people wrong. The team dived from small boats using scuba diving gear. However, they found it difficult to see anything in the murky waters. In 1967, after nearly 2 years of searching, McKee and his team borrowed some sonar equipment. With the help of this technology, they discovered a strange, oval-shaped hump about 61 meters long. A dredger raised a mysterious object. As it was raised, McKee's team realized it was an iron gun from the Mary Rose. They knew they had found the site of the wreck. Soon, they also found a ship's wooden frame. They had finally found the Mary Rose. A diver investigates a wheel from a gun carriage on the Mary Rose. Sonar equipment. Sonar stands for sound navigation and ranging. It is used to find underwater objects by bouncing electronic sound waves off them. The discovery of the Mary Rose caused great excitement. Mad Mac was not so mad after all. For 7 years, a team of divers, led by archaeologist Margaret Rule, continued to uncover the ship. They found that the ship had landed on its starboard side, with its port side projecting up. Over the years, mud and silt had buried the starboard side, protecting it from marine worms and salty water. The port side was not protected and had mostly decayed. McKee and his team saw their years of searching pay off. They raised thousands of 16th-century artifacts. There were wooden longbows, musical instruments, board games, and even a pot of ointment with a fingerprint still in it. More than 200 skeletons were also discovered. A large tankard, mug, found in the mud near the Mary Rose is being carefully cleaned. Objects found in the wreck included a comb and a wallet, a jug and gold coins. The raising of the Mary Rose was a special moment. On October 11, 1982, 60 million people watched the raising of the Mary Rose live on television. McKee had been worried that the ship might break apart during the lift, but it stayed in one piece. It took 8 hours for a giant floating crane to transfer the ship onto a steel cradle. Then it was laid onto a barge ship and towed ashore. The giant crane, Tog Moore, lifted the whole of Mary Rose. Visitors viewed the ship in a climate-controlled gallery. Today the Mary Rose can be seen in its own ship hall in Portsmouth, England. It is being conserved by a constant spray of wax that keeps it from drying out and falling apart. Thousands of artifacts are stored in their own museum nearby, where they are being carefully preserved. The work of Alexander McKee and his team meant that the Mary Rose and its treasures could be salvaged. These treasures provide us with information about life long ago. Fascinating facts and figures. From its discovery to its raising, the Mary Rose was in the care of 500 divers who made a total of 27,831 dives and spent a total of 4,000 hours underwater. They recovered 20,571 artifacts. They took 70 hours of videotape and used 31,500 sheets of paper for writing logbook entries. Discovering the Titanic. On April 10, 1912, a gigantic passenger ship set out on its first voyage from Southampton, England to New York City, United States. Its name was the Titanic and it was described as unsinkable. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic collided with a huge iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. Water rushed in and in less than 3 hours the ship had sunk. There were not enough lifeboats, and about 1,500 of the 2,200 passengers and crew drowned. The Titanic was an elegant hotel at sea. People thought it was the safest ship in the world. The Titanic sank quickly after it hit an iceberg. Dr. Robert Ballard was the scientist who led the search for the Titanic. Many attempts were made to find the wreck, but the Titanic was too deep. In 1985, a team from France and the United States, led by American scientist Dr. Robert Ballard, decided to search for the Titanic together. The U.S. Navy had a remote-controlled submersible called Argo. They sent it down from a large French ship called Le Suroit. After 3 weeks of searching, they found nothing. They then moved to the smaller, U.S. Navy ship, Nor, and continued to search the remaining area with Argo. Ballard and his team watched from Nor as Argo sent images back from the depths. Nor, a surface ship, launched the Argo, which descended to the bottom of the sea. A cable connected Argo to the Nor. Wacky schemes. Plans to find and salvage the Titanic began soon after it sank. Some of the more far-fetched ideas included raising the ship from the seabed by blowing it up with explosives, by pulling it up with magnets, and by filling it with gas-filled balloons to help it float. A scientist uses remote control to move Argo's cameras. In the early hours of September 1, 1985, an enormous boiler from a ship's engine room loomed into view on the screen. It belonged to the Titanic. Ballard's team had found the wreck at last. Argo began to send back more incredible pictures. The huge wreck was resting upright on the seabed, but the back section, the stern, had broken apart and was resting 600 meters away. This proved that the Titanic had snapped in two. Ballard and his team told the world about their exciting discovery. Their next goal was to explore the Titanic on the seabed. How the ship broke in two. 1. The supposedly watertight compartments flooded, and the bow began to sink. 2. The weight of the water pulled the bow underwater and the stern out of the water. 3. The ship broke apart under the strain of the weight. 4. The bow plunged to the bottom, nose first. Then the stern sank. Alvin can descend to about 4,500 meters underwater. In July 1986, Robert Ballard returned to the site of the wreck to make the first manned dive to the Titanic. He went down in a submersible named Alvin, which had its own remote-controlled robot named Jason Jr., or JJ. It was equipped with high-powered cameras and lights. Ballard visited the wreck 9 times in Alvin, using JJ's cameras to see inside the Titanic. JJ took thousands of pictures of the ship and the artifacts that surrounded it. Wreck site. This map shows the route of the Titanic. After hitting an iceberg, the ship broke into 2 pieces and sank. The bow of the ship, which plunged into the water first. The end of a bronze deck chair found on board. The remote-controlled robot, JJ, was able to take pictures, both inside and outside the wreck. The noddle. Spotlights. 2 robotic arms for picking up objects. The noddle's spotlights show stacked plates lying on the ocean floor. These plates have been cleaned and restored. In July 1987, a French team of scientists explored the Titanic in a submersible called the Noddle. The Noddle's mechanical arms scooped up 1,800 artifacts and brought them to the surface. The French team has been working ever since, raising artifacts and lending them to museums. Before the objects are exhibited, they are carefully restored. The artifacts give us a picture of life in the early 20th century. Arctic shipwreck. Wreck site. The world's most northerly shipwreck, HMS Breadalbane, sank off Beechey Island in the Canadian Arctic. In 1983, Canadian scientist Joseph McInnes set off to explore the Canadian Arctic. He found a ship sitting 107 meters below the ice on the seafloor coated with a layer of pink coral. Everything was in its place. McInnes had stumbled upon the English HMS Breadalbane. It had been on a rescue mission when it was sliced by an iceberg and sank within 15 minutes. Fortunately, all 21 crew members had escaped, leaving everything how McInnes found it. Joseph McInnes with the diving vessel that helped him discover the HMS Breadalbane. In search of hidden treasure. In 1717, an English pirate named Black Sam Bellamy captured the Whydah, an English slave ship. The Whydah was on its way back to England through the Caribbean seas, after delivering slaves from Africa, when Bellamy raided it. He loaded it with treasures that he and his fellow pirates had stolen from 50 other ships, and sailed for his home in Cape Cod, United States. Just off the Cape, the Whydah was caught in a fierce storm. It sank, taking Bellamy and all of his crew, except 2, with it. Originally a slave ship, the Whydah was a large pirate ship with 3 masts. It was filled with silver and gold. The American undersea explorer Barry Clifford had been fascinated by the Whydah since he was a boy growing up on Cape Cod. His uncle used to tell him fabulous stories about the infamous pirate ship and its legendary treasure. The diving team searched for artifacts where the ship sank. Wreck site. This map shows the location of the Whydah wreck, off Cape Cod. Detecting metal. Clifford and his team searched for the Whydah using metal detectors and a magnetometer, a device that detects iron underwater. They were searching for the iron cannons, guns, and a bell that their research told them had been on board the Whydah. In 1985, the discovery of a ship's bell that said, "The Whydah Galley 1716" proved that Barry Clifford had found the pirate ship. After a year of searching, the team found a cannon and a silver coin dated 1684. Since then, they have found around 200,000 artifacts, including gold and silver coins, jewelry, weapons, and dishes. All have been carefully salvaged and preserved and are kept in a museum in Massachusetts dedicated to Whydah relics. There are still many artifacts to be found. The artifacts give an amazing amount of information about life in the early 1700s. They also provide a glimpse into the mysterious world of pirates. Spanish coins. Divers brought Spanish coins, similar to these, from the wreck to the surface. Recovering a lost city. Underwater archaeologists find and explore undersea cities as well as discover artifacts. One such undersea city was Port Royal, the Caribbean center for the slave and sugar trades. It was also home to pirates who stole from Spanish treasure ships. In 1692, Port Royal was hit by an earthquake and tidal waves. The city slid into the sea, and 2,000 people died. In 1966, American underwater archaeologist Robert Marks excavated the area where Port Royal lay submerged. He uncovered 50,000 artifacts, 40 buildings, and 2 shipwrecks. A diver examines a section of stairwell from Port Royal. Wreck site. The city of Port Royal stood on a sandy peninsula. The sand had turned to quicksand with the heat of the earthquake and pulled the buildings down. The sand preserved the buildings and their contents. In 1981, the American Institute of Nautical Archaeology began to examine the area. The buildings and artifacts helped them to understand how the people of Port Royal lived. Some of these buildings had once belonged to wealthy shopkeepers and contained pirate treasures. Many artifacts can be seen at the Port Royal Museum in the nearby city of Kingston, Jamaica. There are still thousands of underwater wrecks waiting to be discovered. With the help of new technologies, underwater archaeologists can explore even further into the ocean depths. Many more underwater treasures will one day be uncovered. Glossary. Artifact, an object made or changed by humans, especially a tool or weapon from the past. Bow, the front end of a ship. Conserved, to have saved something from loss, decay or waste, to preserve. Dredger, a boat with machinery used to scoop up sand, mud, and other materials from a river or ocean. Excavated, to have dug up. Longbow, a wooden bow used for firing arrows. Magnetometer, a device that detects iron under the water. Peninsula, a narrow area of land jutting out into the sea. Port, the left side of a ship. Preserved, to have protected something against decay. Salvaged, to have rescued property from a shipwreck. Scuba diving gear, underwater diving equipment that lets a person breathe air from tanks on their back. Sonar, electronic equipment that uses the echoes from sound waves to locate underwater objects. Starboard, the right side of a ship. Stern, the rear of a ship. Submersible, a vessel capable of operating or remaining underwater, a mini-submarine. Underwater archaeologist, someone who studies and excavates historical shipwrecks and submerged harbors and ports.